Welcome to another episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts. I'm your host, Doug Peters of the Zamboni Company. Our guest today on our episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts is Dave Sandford of Sandford Photography. Today, we're going to be discussing Dave's adventures in photography. Dave, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, and we're looking forward to our listeners getting a chance to hear from you all about your skills in photography and what it was like working with the NHL. Got a few questions to get us started off. Dave, where did you grow up?
I grew up in London, Ontario, Canada, which is still where I call home today.
Great. Home of the London Knights and the London Bridge.
Exactly. We're the real London. We have the real Thames River, the real London Bridge, and the London Knights. Correct.
It's funny, I was up there a few years ago for a event that we were doing, and I took a picture outside the hotel window and told everybody I was in London, and I had a few people in Minnesota that were believing me.
Well, you were in London. It's just a little bit smaller and on this side of the pond.
Right. We had Corey Perry, who skated with the London Knights, played with the Ducks team here for several years, enjoyed watching him play, and my cohort up at our Canadian plant is originally from London as well, Marty Elliott. Unfortunately, Marty's not with us today.
Yeah, there's quite a number of hockey personalities, players, and everything that come from London. It seems to breed a lot of hockey people.
That's awesome. Dave, how did you get your start into your business that you're doing today?
Well, it's into my business. I guess I got my start at a very young age. I was 9 years old when I got my first camera. I had expressed interest in photography, and my dad won a camera in a golf tournament, and he gave me that camera. And from there, that's where things got started. My first love was always animals and wildlife and nature, so that's where I got started in photography. But within a short couple of years, I always played sports since I can remember. And if I wasn't participating in a sport as a teenager and into university, I wanted to photograph that sport, whether it was hockey, basketball, football, whatever it might be. And when it came time to go to university, I had to make decisions on which avenue I wanted to take. So again, long story short, I decided on photography. I had applied to a number of like wildlife and biology related degrees, but ended up choosing photography. I went to Ryerson University in Toronto, did a 4-year degree there, and I opted to focus on sports because I thought if I can reach that level, if I can become good enough that I can become a professional sports photographer, then maybe I can shoot the NHL, I can shoot the Olympics and different things. And nature will always be there, and I can do that on the side. So that's sort of the route that I took. I've been able to lead a very blessed life and very blessed career following that path. I did an internship in university at the Hockey Hall of Fame. I also assisted the Leafs team photographer at the time, Greg Abel, and those two jobs for me essentially set me up for my career. When school finished in 1997 for me, the Hall of Fame photographer that I worked under, Doug McClellan, he retired from hockey photography, I guess you should say. So just literally 2 days before the 97 preseason started, the Hall called me and said, we need a photographer. I interned there for 3 years. It paid off. They offered me the job. I started working exclusively for them. And then partway through that season, the NHL, there was rumors they were going to form their own internal photo agency. And those rumors came to be, and they reached out to me before the season had ended, inquiring about hiring me. And I kind of did a bit of a trial with them the rest of that season while working with the Hall of Fame. And then basically at the end of that season, I started my career with the National Hockey League and haven't looked back.
It's interesting that you got your start with a camera. We did a podcast with Kenny Albert, who is Marv Albert's son. Calls some of the games for NHL. You might have run into him if you're up in Edmonton. And he does some of the games for NFL. He's called all four major league sports. And it was interesting with his start. He was given a cassette recorder at the age of 5. So it's interesting how the influence of parents can have on their kids and what their careers are going to be. But it still has to be a passion, I think. And it sounds like you have that passion for not only sports, but for shooting outdoor life as well.
Absolutely. It's the biggest driving force for me. I'm so passionate about photography and about the things that I photograph, as in sports and wildlife. I'm very fortunate that because of that passion, I truly feel like I get to play for a living. I don't really have a job. I mean, it is a job, but I love it so much, and I always just want to be shooting. And like I say, I'm very blessed that way, because a lot of people don't have the good fortune of finding something that they love so much and doing it well enough that it allows you to make a living at doing it.
It's interesting that when I've talked with young people and I talked with my kids, I now talk to my grandkids about what it is that they want to do for a living, because obviously we all have to go out there and have a job to make income to survive in this world. I've always said, find something that you enjoy doing, because if you have a passion for it, it's going to make it be enjoyable to the point where it's almost not work. You're in a position where you're getting to do something, I think, that it's coming across that you love. I've been fortunate in my career that I've worked for a great company that's allowed me the opportunity to see many things. And I'm not going to say it's not like work, because you're still having to create on your end. You have to get the photos. On my end, I have to get the sales. So it's a little different, but it is something that makes the time go by a lot faster when you're passionate about something.
Oh, absolutely. Time flies. It really does. I mean, I know we're going to get into it further along here, but I spent 69 days in the bubble in Edmonton for the return to play, and it felt like it was 2 weeks to me. But that's what happens. Time flies when you're having fun.
Growing up in Canada, can I guess that hockey might have been your favorite sport as a youth?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up playing hockey. I don't play like I used to. It's actually been, I think, about 5 or 6 years now since I've actually played competitively, if you can call it that, men's league hockey. But I basically kind of retired from it, just from being on the road too much and missing too many games. And I do miss playing on a regular basis. I play pickup, periodically here and there. And but yeah, hockey's always been my favorite, and it always will be my favorite. And I've been very fortunate to, have such a great opportunity to work in a game that I grew up loving and playing.
Did you shoot any other sports when you were growing up in experimenting, maybe getting into it? Did you do anything where you maybe sent pictures into local papers or that type of thing that helped you hone your skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I photographed every sport I possibly could. If I wasn't playing, then I would photograph it. So throughout high school and university, football, basketball, volleyball, soccer, you name it, I photographed it. And university, that's sort of how I, on top of like the internship and working for the Greg with the Leafs, I did all the photography, the action photography and team photos for my university at Ryerson. And it just started out as something I was doing on my own, and basically went to the athletic department and said to them, here's what I've got. And I was always trying to go the extra mile? What's going to make me stand out above the crowd? So in university, I started strobing everything. So the big flash systems that we use to this day up in the catwalks of the arenas, whether it's hockey, basketball, I was taking these, signing them out of school and going across the city of Toronto on the subway on Friday and Saturday nights to light St. Mike's Arena. And it would take me 2 or 3 hours to set all the strobes up, and all my friends would be out at the bar and having drinks and having fun. And I'd be on my way to do that and then shoot a hockey game and then take an hour and a half to break it down and then hop in the subway and come back and then maybe catch them for last call. And there was a lot of nights that was a little frustrating as a student and it sucked, but it paid off because that's what led to my internship and my job with the Leafs. And then again with Ryerson, I ended up doing all the stuff for the Ryerson papers and for their posters and promotional items. And so the hard work paid off very early on because it got me noticed. As I say, doing something a little bit different than what everybody else was doing. And photographing those other sports. I think it's just like you hear hockey players say all the time, they recommend to, to parents of kids growing up playing hockey, play something else in the summer, do something different. It makes you a more well-rounded athlete and a better hockey player in the end. And I think the same thing with photography when it comes to, shooting the other sports. It really helped me hone my skills, and it made me a better hockey shooter in the end.
Do you think it helps to understand the sport when you're trying to get the shot? And another question that I've got is, is it kind of like Wayne Gretzky? Wayne Gretzky to me was, it's hard to say the greatest of all time, but certainly one of the greatest players to ever play the sport. His mind was always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. Is your mind like that as well, where you're able to envision what it is that's going to happen on the ice to get that great shot?
Well, I think it's easy to say Wayne Gretzky is the greatest hockey player ever, so I'll say it. And you're absolutely right. It's the better you know your subject, the better you know the game, the sport, the better you're going to be at photographing it. It's like, for example, when I go to photograph football, I'm nowhere near as good at photographing football as I am hockey. I get faked out all the time. I'll think it's going to be a long pass, and it ends up being a handoff. And then when it's a handoff, I'm ready for the long pass. And I just don't follow football as closely as I do hockey, and I don't photograph it enough to learn the intricacies of the game like guys that would shoot it day in and day out. And then when it comes to the anticipation and knowing a sport, you're exactly right. Like, I think the guys that have really elevated their game as far as the photography goes, you do think that way. You have to anticipate. You can't react. If you've reacted, you've missed it. So you do have to have a really good sense of anticipation. And again, by knowing the game, knowing the players, basically being a student of the game, just like a player is, you can learn these things, and it really, really helps you take your photography to the next level. And I think the other thing too is when you do know it that well, when you are a student of the game, and I don't know whether this is just a natural ability or if it's something that's learned over time, but I often say, whether it's hockey or whether it's my wildlife stuff, you see things in slow motion. And you often hear athletes say that. And that's, I think, a super cool thing is I'm watching these plays happen. And when you get home and you watch the highlights or you rewatch a game or something, you're like, I even question myself, like, how did I get that? How did I know that was going to happen? Like, because when I watch it on TV, it's not the same. But when you're there in person, it seems that everything just has this way of slowing down. And when I think when you get to that point, like I say, I don't know whether it's something that's learned or you pull it from deep within, and it was a natural ability that was there, but it really takes your photography to the next level.
I think it's like athletes. Some athletes have that and some don't. Like with Gretzky, obviously, the only person that I've seen, and it's years ago, that I thought not that he could hold a candle to, because he was a talented player, but not to the level of Gretzky. But Wayne or Neil Broughton played for the North Stars as a Minnesota kid, played on the 1980 Olympic team as well, and he had the hand-eye coordination and he had vision, and they call it that, where they see things in the slow motion. It drives me nuts when I'm watching hockey now. We're subjected, due to COVID, having to watch classic games. So I'm looking back and now I'm watching when the Ducks won the Stanley Cup, and that goes back to 2007, and they had games against the Red Wings and other games. And it just, for me, I can anticipate where the puck's going to go, and it drives me nuts when the camera guy is not doing the same thing, or they'll show a picture of somebody, a shot of the goalie when maybe there's a scrum going on, and I'm like going, I don't want to see the goalie's face. I want to see what's going on. So it's very interesting what you're talking about, and it is a talent that I think that you have, Dave. And I think some of that stuff is not that you can develop; it's what you're born into, and you really have honed it to a skill level that others don't have. Do you have any shots? Like, I've seen some shows on TV about Muhammad Ali, and there's the shot of him where he's standing over, and there's a guy, I think, in the background, if I recall it correctly. Do you have anything like that where something appeared in the photo that you weren't intending to shoot, but made the photo better? Is there anything like that that you can talk about that you've expanded on?
When it comes to my sports, off the top of my head, I honestly, I can't think of anything. I mean, there are things all the time where, yeah, you're shooting with the, a certain intent, and yes, things, materialize that you weren't anticipating, and it enhances things. It makes it better. But I mean, of the millions of photos that I have now taken, off the top of my head, unfortunately, I'm sorry, I can't think of anything. But yes, for sure, that has happened. Not as iconic as maybe the moment you're referring to with Muhammad Ali, but I definitely keep hoping for that kind of thing.
In hockey, and this is maybe asking the same question, but there's the Bobby Orr flying through the air. Have you captured anything that short of maybe the Leafs winning the Stanley Cup? That hasn't happened for a bit, but is it something that you've got a photo that would be like that, a goal clinching moment that you just happen to get it at just the right moment?
I mean, the Bobby Orr moment, obviously, when you're talking hockey, that's like the pinnacle of those types of moments, and that's something that I've always dreamt of. My dream has always been to shoot a Stanley Cup final Game 7 overtime and capture that overtime winning goal in a fashion in which stands out from the rest. So the only way to really do that is with the net cam, because there's only two nets, only two people can, one in one net and one in the other. And so it's something I've always hoped and dreamt of, but I have yet to have that moment in a Game 7 Stanley Cup overtime. And a defining moment, and we can't tell whether the picture will stand the test of time yet, but just this season that completed in the Stanley Cup final, I think it would be hard to argue that maybe the biggest moment of the playoffs this year was when Steve Stamkos came back, and when Stammer came down the ice, 3.5 minutes in, and rifled that shot top shelf. I was in the absolute most perfect position for it, and got a really nice couple frames of it. The puck coming off his stick, and then in the top corner of the net. And at the time, I guess I didn't really think about it. It wasn't until after the cup was won and everybody's talking about, the impact that Stammer had coming back, and the importance of that goal. And I think maybe over time, we'll see that photo a little bit more. And that moment will be talked about a lot into the future. So I can't say whether that image is quite the Bobby Orr moment, but I think it definitely has the potential to be up there. The other factor in that too is that there's only a couple photographers in the building, as opposed to a normal Stanley Cup final where there would be 30 to 40 in the building and everybody would have it. So, and then aside from that, I think the only, something that when I do get this question that really stands out to me is I was only one of a couple photographers that were in the locker room when Wayne Gretzky hung up his skates for the last time. And that moment isn't an action shot. It's not on the ice, but it's probably my most iconic hockey photo to date. With him turning around and hanging his skates up in his stall for the very last time. And I was, being a Gretzky fan my entire life, and him being my boyhood idol, I was, right there in front of him, bawling my eyes out as I was taking that photo. It was a very emotional time, and I see that photo everywhere, and especially on the anniversary of his retirement, or the anniversary of his last game. So that's one that's stood the test of time, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I think your photo of Stamkos will be down the road. And I think Bobby Orr's photo, that photo obviously was a great shot, but it doesn't have the same, or probably didn't have the same weight back then as it does now. And it's, again, one of the greatest players. If it would have been Joe Schmo scoring a goal, it still would have been good. But when it is a guy of the stature of Bobby Orr, it definitely is something. So,
absolutely.
Dave, do you think that it's easier now? And believe me, I don't think that photography is an easy thing, but is with the equipment that's available today to use and shooting digital, is it easier to create things, or was it easier before? And obviously you notice what you're getting with a digital camera. You can see what you took as opposed to waiting for it to be developed. But what's your take on that?
It's a bit of both, and I say that because up until 2001, I shot film, and when I shot film, I would literally, I'd shoot a period, and at the end of the period, I would be able to socialize and mix and mingle and do whatever, and at the end of the game, wait for traffic to clear and take off, and I'd get home and I'd drop the film in a FedEx pack and send it to the office in New York, and that would be it. And then a couple times a year, I'd get to go into the office in New York and I'd go through the stuff. The big difference now is with everything being digital, my workload is increased like tenfold. So digital is both a blessing and a curse when it comes to sports photography, because there's so much more work to be done now. After warm up, you're uploading pictures. After each period, you're uploading pictures. You have to do captions for those pictures and process them, cropping and color corrections, different things like that. So, and then there's the second edits, which, have to go out. So that might be 100 to 200 more pictures that you have to send out in the following days. So from that standpoint, there's a lot more to do when it comes to digital photography. It's made us, made the requirements of the job expand quite a bit. As far as like the technology itself, it's a blessing, because like you're right, you have that instant feedback. So if you've done something wrong, you know right away, you can make corrections. When I say done something wrong, as in your lighting, or your focus, or for a remote camera, or when you're shooting in low light situations, like where they have pre-games and you got spotlights and different colored lights and everything, and the lights moving around and changing. Digital's a blessing that way, because as I say, you get that instant feedback, and it's a little bit more forgiving than film was. So you have some room to make mistakes, I guess, and correct them in post if necessary. So it's extra work, but I also like having that control as well. I don't have to worry about an image not being sharp and maybe getting past an editor and getting out there, and my name's attached to a soft focused picture. Whereas now, if there's a picture that's soft or out of focus or something technically is wrong, that's on me because I've let that go out to the world. So you have a little bit more creative control, which is nice.
You talked about your photo of both Stamkos and Gretzky, and I don't know what the proper terminology would be in the photography world, but do you find that there's more raw emotion or the look on people's faces when you're shooting them, maybe sitting on a bench, maybe after they've taken a slap shot off the ankle, or they've just had a tooth knocked out, versus something that's flying along? Maybe you can explain the difference that I'm trying to talk about here with that. Is there something along those lines, or where you're going to see the pure raw emotion in an athlete sitting on the bench or scoring a goal?
It's funny that you mentioned that because going into the NHL bubble without fans being there, that was one of the things I was wondering is what kind of emotions are we going to see? What kind of raw emotion are we going to see from the players? Because you don't have 15 to 20,000 people in a building who the players that they feed off of that energy. And I was wondering what's going to happen in an empty arena when a player scores a goal. Is it just going to be like men's league hockey, put your stick in the air and nod to the other guys and maybe a few fist bumps? And as we went along, that raw emotion, it shone through more and more and more. And it was super cool to see that. I think that was, to me, the indicator of like the guys are playing for the love of the game. They're playing for one another. They're playing for the other 22 guys on the roster and everybody that's affiliated with that club and the fan base. Like, so it was cool to see that raw emotion, really shine through, especially in the bigger moments. And yeah, you do see that, like you're talking when a guy blocks a shot and he's wincing as he's going back to the bench, or there's blood pouring down his face, and he gets back to the bench, and like those are key moments. Those are all like, that's what I call the B-roll footage that helps tell your story. When you can get those tight shots of a guy wincing in pain because he's blocked a shot, or he's bleeding, or black eyes and stitches and things like that, and that there's a certain look that certain guys get, especially in playoff time, that everybody always talked about Mark Messier and the look that he had, that intimidating look. And if we had a modern day player that I could say is somewhat similar to that, it's Jamie Benn. Anytime I've had an interaction with Jamie, I don't know him personally, but he's always been super nice. And from what I've seen being around the club and that, like, he's soft spoken, he's a nice guy, but he gets out in the ice and he looks like he wants to tear your head off, and he could, like, and that's one of the things I love, is seeing that, like I say, that raw emotion come out without even using words or screaming or yelling or anything. It's just a look that some guys have. And then, yeah, like I'm fortunate to be mic'd, tapped into the mics that NHL Studios uses quite often. And, to hear that as well, what, some of the comments back and forth between players and everything, and that emotion that does come out, it's pretty darn cool. And as I say, it was cool to see that in an empty arena, in such an intense playoff hockey.
Can you talk a little bit about what a day in the life of Dave was, either in the bubble shooting the games that took place for the tournament this year for the Stanley Cup, or what it was like pre-COVID and when you're just doing a regular day on the road?
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking regular season hockey, a typical day for me is, do whatever I need to do, as in go to the gym, do my own thing in the morning. And I would, leave usually mid-afternoon. For the most part, because I live in London, Ontario. I'm 2 hours from Detroit, Toronto, and Buffalo. So most of my games over my career have been in those three cities. I might leave home at around 2 in the afternoon, get to the rink about 4 for a 7:30 game. And basically, I like to be there early, get set up, make sure that everything is working so I can sit down and sort of relax, have my dinner, get a little behind the scenes stuff before warm up, then do a little bit of warm up. Like as mentioned before, you come in, you upload some pictures, and then the puck drops. And in between periods, you're making your selects, you're doing little captions, and you're sending those pictures into the desk, which then get put out to the world. And it's the same thing post game. It's probably about an hour and change post game that you're doing that upload. And then I'd hop in the car and drive home, and usually get home around 1:30 in the morning. And they're long days. A lot of people think like, oh, it must be nice. You go to a hockey game and you shoot a game for 2.5 hours and you're done. Like most game days are a good 12-hour day plus another, anywhere between 3, 4, 5 hours following that to do all the second edits. And then being in the bubble, it was a completely different thing. And I should say too, when you're on the road for playoffs, like all stars, different things like that, they're long days. They're usually minimum 12, upwards of 18 hours sometimes. There's just a lot going on behind the scenes that, what the preparation and pregame skates and setting up remote cameras and different things like that. And in the bubble, very early on, it was so hectic. It was crazy. The first 5 weeks or so, having 2 to 3 games a day. I was getting up at about 7:30 in the morning, at the arena by 9 for a noon game, and then leaving the arena at about 1 a.m. And just absolutely drained. And the problem is when you do that, you get back to your hotel room and you're wired. You've just shot 2 or 3 Stanley Cup playoff games, and you're looking at computer screens and you're doing all this stuff and you're absolutely wired. So I wouldn't fall asleep till between 3 and 4 in the morning, and then my alarm would go off, like I say, 7:30 in the morning. So it made for extremely long, tough days for sure. Like you love what you do, but it just physically and mentally draining. And as the bubble went on, the games got higher in intensity, but thankfully more manageable. I loved when it was 2 games a day. That was kind of a very happy medium. And then in the 1 game a day, it just allowed you to have more time to do your second editing, get things uploaded, because all that still had to happen, even amidst 3 game days, back to back to back to back. So it just made things at a little more reasonable pace, and made the days at the arena 10 to 12-hour days versus the 18.5-hour days, 19-hour days. So they're pretty intense. But like I say, I mean, I loved it, and I wouldn't want to change it for anything. But yeah, they're long days, and those days at the arena in the bubble, yeah, I mean, I was slapping together peanut butter sandwiches and I'm eating them sitting at the glass, trying with a camera in a hand and peanut butter sandwich in the other. Like it was just, there was no time to do anything other than just shoot hockey basically. But I loved it.
Well, I'll give you a suggestion. You should try some Cheese Whiz. It's a craft product and it's great. It's great on rye bread or Italian bread. I've done a podcast where I had that for my lunch with Luke Robitaille. I was driving up to Lake Tahoe, and that was what I had. But I grew up on Cheese Whiz as a kid, so I can highly recommend it. Do you ever get to practice with any of the players or go out on a warm-up skate or a morning? Obviously, you're not going to go out there during warm-ups before a game, but do you ever get the chance to skate with some of the NHL players?
I have. For a number of years, for about 10 years actually, every Friday in Toronto, we would have Friday hockey. And I would play with a bunch of guys from the Hall of Fame, the Toronto Maple Leafs organization, Nhl in the NHL office, and a lot of former players would come out. So I've had the opportunity to play with the likes of Mike Gartner and Steve Larmer, Paul Coffey, Ron Ellis. There's a whole bunch more. I've played with probably dozens of players over the years, and it really showcases how bad of a hockey player I am, and how they can make people look really good by just saying go to the net and put your stick on the ice. And that's been a lot of fun to have those opportunities. I've also played with a number of the women from the national women's team over the years. But yeah, to go and do like regular practices and things like that. No, I've never done anything like when the guys are training here in London and that. But yeah, the Friday hockey that lasted for about 10 years, getting to play with a lot of former NHL players, which was always very cool and very humbling.
Did you ever take Tiger Williams or Phil Pritchard hard into the corner and kind of face wash them while they were there?
Yeah, Phil for sure, definitely.
We were lucky to have him on a podcast earlier. Great guy, and you are a great guest as well, because it makes my job very easy. I can ask a question, and you can take it and run with it, and you're doing an awesome job. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
If you could score a goal against any goalie, past, present, or future, who might it be?
Grant Fuhr. Simply because I grew up an Oiler fan. Grant Fuhr is my favorite goaltender of all time, and yeah, it would be pretty darn cool to have the opportunity to score a goal on Grant Fuhr. And I guess if I had to pick a second goalie, it would be Marty Brodeur. He would be my second favorite goalie, and probably my favorite goalie to photograph. Yeah.
I'm going to go a little bit.
Too. Can I throw in Tretiak?
You certainly can.
I think I put him in my top three of all time. So I'll round it out with Fuhr, Brodeur, and Tretiak.
No Gump Worsley or Cesar Maniago?
Too much before my time.
I'm showing my age. They played for the North Stars many moons ago, and I was lucky enough to see them play, and lucky enough to see Gump play minus a mask. He was the last goalie to go without a mask. The last crazy guy. You've got to have a lot of expensive equipment. And what is that like to ensure that it doesn't get damaged in all your travels? And how do you transport that from location to location if you have to fly?
So I do have a lot of expensive gear, and therefore I never let it leave my sight. So when I'm traveling, when I'm flying and everything, I've got it down to a system where I use a 40-liter backpack. It's made for camera gear, and it is packed to the rim basically, with bodies and lenses and batteries and my computer. And if I have to carry my larger lenses like my 600 mil or my 400, I have a neoprene carrying case, and I basically carry that over my shoulder, because I don't like to check gear. I need it when I land. 90% of the time I'm needing it the same day that I'm landing or the very next morning, and I don't want to risk it not arriving. And then I've heard way too many horror stories about gear showing up broken and gear not showing up at all because stuff gets picked off behind the scenes at the airports, unfortunately. So I don't ever let cameras, camera bodies, lenses, laptops, all that kind of stuff. It's always on my person. Different if I have to travel with lighting and clamps and cables and all the accessories and things like that. I'll throw those in cases and check those. But yeah, the real expensive, fragile stuff always stays on my person.
I have a friend whose son is a quadriplegic, and he's a friend of mine as well. And I've heard horror stories about him with his wheelchair traveling, and what that's like and what it's arrived at in certain places when he's got there. Have you had any emergencies and gone to photo store to try to get something to help you get through your shoot, or is it something that you just deal with the equipment that you have that's working?
No, I've had emergencies. My latest emergency, not from gear showing up damaged or anything like that. Like I say, that stuff I carry with me. So if I do damage something, it's on me. But yeah, I've had gear damaged in games and in play. Most recently, I had a camera that was in the net, that I used from a net cam, and it took a Taylor Hall slap shot, which it didn't damage it. It damaged it, but it was one of those things where um, the impact of that damage didn't really show for a few days. And sometimes that's what happens. Things get loose, essentially from the impact, and they they eventually go. And there's in those subsequent days, guys are crashing into the net, and the net gets moved around. And one day I went out there, I think it was right near the end of the second round, and went out after the first period, turned the camera off to eject the card, put the new card back in, and the camera just wouldn't turn on. And like I say, I shipped it to Canon and found out that it was impact damage, and it was a result of that Taylor Hall shot. And so yeah, I was sort of panic mode, because I'm like, okay, now I'm down a camera. I had brought 4 bodies with me, but I was utilizing 2 other bodies and for different remotes, and I need, I different times, and I've got 2 cameras on my person, and then the camera in the net. And so long story short, I did have a bit of a panic because I couldn't get a loaner from Canon, and mine wasn't going to be repaired in time. And I was very fortunate that my Canon rep, Jim Nuttall, who is back here in Ontario, I reached out to him to see if he could do anything through Canon, and Jim stepped up and actually sent me one of his own personal bodies, which I just shipped it back yesterday, actually, to him. And I can't thank him enough for that, because he really got me out of a not a jam. I would have been able to get by, but I was already basically a month into this, and everything was moving along nice and smoothly. And then I would have had to essentially make decisions as to, okay, do I want to put a camera in the net, or do I want it overhead, or do I need another remote body somewhere else? So I only had to go 2 days without, and Jim saved my bacon, and I was able to put another camera back in the net, and I used Jim's as my camera in hand, because I wasn't going to put somebody else's camera in the net. But yeah, you run into those situations. There's been lots of times over the years where something happens in a game, a lens gets hit by a puck or various things, sticks, and you're in a bit of a bind. And oftentimes people will step up if you're in a real emergency situation. Somebody's got an extra body or a lens or something, and most people are really great team players, and will step up and loan you some gear to get you through the day or the week or whatever it might be.
It's nice when people will step up and help you out, whatever the emergency might be. You mentioned you were in Toronto. Did you get to shoot any of the games? I'm sorry, you're in Edmonton. Did you get to shoot any of the games in Toronto as part of the event that went on this year?
No, I didn't. The option was put forward to me by my boss at the league. She asked me if I wanted to do Toronto or Edmonton, and right away I said Edmonton. And I mean, like I said, I grew up an Oiler fan, so the opportunity to go do games in Edmonton and out west was great. And but yeah, as soon as I said to her Edmonton, she was like, "Oh, good, that's what I wanted you to say," because Edmonton is the main hub, and that's where conference finals and finals will be. So it worked out quite well.
What was it like in the building itself? There was obviously some background noise piped in for the fans watching the games on TV. Was it just the skates and the sticks and the pucks, or did you guys have noise piped in that you could hear as well and that the players could hear?
So the first few games that we did, there was the 5 exhibition games that they played. There was no sound for that. And it was kind of strange. It was like, especially that first game, puck drops and that's all you hear are sticks and skates and guys yelling. And so it was a little bit of getting used to. And then, but I found by like maybe game 2 or 3, you're sort of in that zone doing what you do. And once the puck dropped, there was no difference to me. And especially, and then once we got out of those exhibition games and into the actual games that counted, that's when they started pumping in the crowd noise into the building. And so, yeah, players could hear it. We could all hear it. And I mean, for the most part, yeah, I think they did a great job with it. It's one guy that's doing it. And just like anything, practice makes perfect. So as we got through the 81 games that we had in Edmonton, he definitely got better at it, and it sounded much more natural, I guess you would say, because there were times for sure, like, I mean, and it would all just, I guess, depend on his perspective. You see something happen, and then you hear a certain crowd reaction, and you're like, at first you're sort of like, what, oh, okay, like that, nothing really happened, but from his perspective, it looked like something did. So you get cheers or, whatever. But and I talked to a couple of the players who, yeah, they similar thing where they sometimes feed off of that. They react to that. They might be skating away from the play, and then they would hear the crowd noise do, like go up in volume or something, and they turn to, and there's nothing, but it's because he had a delayed reaction or, but those little hiccups or whatever you would call them are few and far between. It sounded pretty darn natural to me. And especially, like I say, once the puck drops and you get shooting, it's just ambient background noise. You're not focused on that. And one thing that I will mention is, like, compared to a real crowd, is sometimes, things happen, and because you're ingesting photos and that, like, I've got to tag images to send to my editors. So I might be looking down, and oftentimes in the past, when it's a real crowd, I would use the sound of that crowd to know when I had to look up, like, oh, the play's turning around to come up ice. And I didn't have that. So there's a couple times where you get caught because, you don't have that natural crowd reaction. And I'd have my head down, and then I'd look up, and like the play's right in front of me, So I had to sort of make a rule for myself as I went along. Like, if the play is on, I'm not looking at the camera. Like, it's, because I missed a few goals early that way. And so you have to adjust to, to what the surroundings were like, so you wouldn't miss those opportunities.
It was a different world for the players, the fans, and even the photographers in having to adapt to it. So hopefully this coming season, when it does get started, it will be back to a more normal season for all of us.
Fingers crossed, yes.
Do you work for the NHL as an NHL employee, or are you a contracted employee? Could you fill our listeners in on how things work for you with the NHL?
Yeah, so I'm a contract employee. Basically, how it works for me is it's literally event to event. I get a different contract for every single thing that I do. And the NHL used to be my one and only up until 2005. That was it. It was exclusive to them. And when the lockout happened in like 04, 05, everything changed. So when it came back, that's when things started as a contract photographer. And for a while there, yeah, it was different. It was tougher, but after all these years now, and I'm able to say that it was the best thing ever, because it allowed me more opportunities to do other things. Like, I worked for the NBA for 13 years as well, and I was able to freelance for Getty Images and do all my own stuff, my nature and wildlife stuff. And so being a contract employee is, for me, definitely, the best way to be. I've got the best of both worlds, especially now. I have tons of opportunity to focus on my nature and wildlife side of my career, and basically I'm only contracted for about 6 to 8 weeks throughout the entire year for the NHL. And like I say, I if I can keep it this way the rest of my career, I'd be the happiest guy in the world.
Do you get to travel with the Stanley Cup? Let's call it a normal year. Would you be off with the players taking pictures? And if so, how are things going to be different this year when the players get the cup and have it at their locale for the day that they get it?
So in years past, I've traveled with the cup, like, I mean, all kinds. Like it's funny, sometimes Phil Pritchard and Mike Bolt, who basically spend the most time with it, they often joke that I spend more time with it than they do. And so I've been fortunate to spend a lot of time around the Stanley Cup. And in a normal year, it sort of just depends on, the what, where, when, why, how. If the cup has been won in the city by the home team, oftentimes, yes, I've stuck around and stayed for a week. And it just depends. Like, when the Kings won it last in 2014, I stayed with Jeff Carter and his then girlfriend, now wife, for 5 or 6 days afterwards. And I just, and it was phenomenal to do things that way, and in other years, like I flew to Dallas when they won 21 years ago. I flew to Dallas and spent a week with them, and that was one of the most incredible weeks of my life. Early in my career, and just so much fun. And yeah, I've stayed in Colorado when they went. There's a number of cities where I've been there, so it's like, yeah, it works out that I just stay there. And as far as traveling with the cup throughout the summer, I've never done that. The only time I've, I guess, been around or participated in the cup days are basically guys that I know. So there's been a number of guys over the year that have one of two things: either asked me to just come and be around and be, if you want to bring your camera, we'll provide the drinks and the food. And then other times where guys have said to me, I'll, pay you to do my cup day for me. And that comes from, like I say, those personal relationships and guys trusting you and knowing that you're not. I'm there to make them look good. That's the way I always put it. I'm not there to make anybody look bad. And because there's been crazy things that have happened at cup parties, that pictures that will never see the light of day, and that's that trust factor that comes in. But yeah, it's been a lot of fun over the years. I've had so many amazing opportunities with the Stanley Cup and at various cup parties, whether they be personal parties and or team organized events. It's, and this year's very different, obviously.
Do you have a favorite NHL story that you can share with us that is not TMZ-ish, or something, a favorite moment that you've had in your career?
I was trying to think of a few, because I have so many, and yes, some would, I guess, qualify as a TMZ type of story for sure. Gosh, there's so, and that's the thing. Sometimes, like, there's so many, it's like, and then you draw this blank, and I've been trying to think about it for a few hours. One of the things for me, I guess, NHL story wise, it was early in my career, and I just referenced it. I was in the locker room shooting the Dallas Stars when they won the cup in '99, and my old boss at the time, Anita Chahowski, she tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Do you want to go to Dallas tonight on the plane with them?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "Do you want to go with the team? Well, it's been arranged. You just have to, if you want to go, you can go." And I'm like, "Okay, but what about my clothes, my gear, everything is all back at the hotel." We were in Buffalo, so I just drove. So fortunately, my cousin was helping out, assisting. So my cousin went back to the hotel, threw all my stuff in a bag. He drove my car back to Canada the next day, and that night I got on a plane with the Dallas Stars. And their PR at the time, Larry Kelly was his name. He took me down the plane, introduced me to every single player, and said, "Dave's here for us." And I was there for a week. And Richard Matvichuk and Craig Ludwig basically took me under their wing. They picked me up at the hotel. They would drop me off. They would make sure I was taken care of. Like, they totally embraced me as one of them. And I, going to the team parties and being, involved with the parade and team photo, doing all of that stuff. It was just, there was so much craziness that surrounded it. That's where we get into the TMZ side of things. I've always said it was like Animal House. It was the wildest week of my life. And something that I'll always remember and always cherish. And then another cool story was I was in the World Cup of Hockey in 2004, right? Yeah, 2004. I was fortunate that I got to do the Hockey Canada camp in Ottawa, and then I went to Europe and I did all the games in Europe. Went to Minnesota, did I think it was the quarterfinals in Minnesota before coming to Toronto for the last couple of games. And that in itself was an amazing experience. But when we were in Toronto one of those days, on a off day, just happened to be at the arena, and Wayne Gretzky and Kevin Lowe were there, and Paulina and Ty were quite young then, and they wanted to go out and play hockey. And I was with Jeff Vinnick, who I was working with at the time. Jeff's the Canucks team photographer, and we've worked doing a lot of Hockey Canada stuff together. I can't exactly remember how it happened, but Jeff and I were out on the ice, and Wayne asked if it was okay if Paulina and Ty played with us. So Jeff and I were out on the ice for about an hour. Well, Wayne and Kevin Lowe sat in the stands about 10 rows up and just watched us play at Air Canada Center, just the four of us out on the ice. That was pretty cool. Sitting there, like I said, playing with my boyhood hockey idols, kids on the ice while he's sitting there watching. And, it's those little unique moments in time that really stand out to me. Like it just, kind of surreal, I guess, and that was just a fun, friendly, happy type of moment.
Did you get the opportunity to see the pads that Craig Ludwig used to wear? Because I think he had these pretty huge shin guards that and I think he had them for God only knows how long. The smell probably could be from Dallas all the way up to Buffalo, or on the plane for 3 weeks later.
Indeed. I was always envious of his shin pads, because I was a defenseman my entire life. So like the ultimate shot blocking shin pads. That's definitely one thing I always remember about him.
Yeah, he's a Wisconsin boy, and I think, if my memory serves me right, has something to do, or might have played up in Eagle River, Wisconsin, where I think the Wisconsin Hockey Hall of Fame is, at a truly old barn, if you ever get the opportunity, or maybe you did get the opportunity to go up there.
Cool.
But followed his career as a kid growing up. My dad worked for the North Stars for the first 8 years, so not only did Minnesota give a hockey team in the Stanley Cup to the state of Texas, but the Herschel Walker trade enabled the Dallas Cowboys to win several Super Bowl titles that I'm still a little bit raw about, but I will eventually get over it, I hope. One of the things I want to get into is your other work outside the NHL. I've got a buddy of mine who I played hockey with. Long story, I won't bore you with the details, but his son is a huge Sharks fan. He's autistic, but the kid's incredible. I've had the opportunity to meet him. You've swam with sharks. Could you fill us in on what that was like, and what other exciting things you've done with nature, please?
Sure. Swimming with sharks is absolutely surreal. No matter how many dives I've done, I get that same feeling of just like, pinch me, is this real? Like, even though that shark is only a couple feet from your face, and as it's cruising past you, and you're locking eyes, like it, there's just something about it that doesn't feel real. Like you feel like you feel like you're sitting 5 feet away from a giant IMAX screen, you know, and if you were to reach out and touch it, that you'd be hitting this flat screen. But not the case, obviously. And it's the same thing with, I guess, a lot of the animals I've been fortunate to um, photograph over my career. Humpback whales is another that comes to mind, like being in the water, underwater with humpback whales and interacting with them. It's completely surreal. It's the best way I know how to describe those situations, because it just doesn't feel real. Even though it is, it's just so bizarre, and but wonderfully bizarre, you know. And Like probably one of my most favorite things to photograph is bears, especially polar bears. I'm actually should be up north photographing polar bears right now. I was supposed to have left on Sunday, and today would have been my second day on the tundra shooting bears. But unfortunately, COVID and restrictions changed again about a month ago, so it prevented me from going north. But bears are such wonderful, amazing characters. They're like real life cartoon characters, and to have the opportunity to spend a lot of time around them is also very surreal. And it you just can't help but always be smiling and laughing, because, as I say, bears are, they're full of antics and personality, and it's it's when you have that opportunity to be on the ice and up north, or on the tundra or in the bush or wherever you are, and have the opportunity to um, interact or engage with bears at a fairly close range. It's pretty special. And so yeah, it's just everything to me is so surreal. Like I truly am humbled by being around it. It makes you, I think, feel very small in this world, and you sort of like, we aren't the only ones here, as in people. There's a lot of other species on this planet, and a lot of species that have been here a lot longer than us and have been through a lot more than we have, and are just as deserving to um, call this planet home, and live life the way that they should be allowed. And so when you're in amongst that, it's very humbling, and it's an honor, it's a privilege, I think, to have the opportunity to get to experience these animals in that way, because most people um, only ever get to see it on their television screen, or on their phone through social media or a computer screen. So to actually be there, surrounded by such an incredible environment, and surrounded by these, you know, absolutely phenomenal animals. Most of them that I cover are big predators, I guess you would say. Um, it's just, it's hard to put it into words. It really is.
I think you're being invited into their world, and that, to me, like, I was lucky enough to go out on a cruise in Hawaii, out of Maui, and it was a snorkeling trip, and saw whales much closer than on a actual whale trip. And we actually had to stop the boat because they were playing, and
Mm-hmm.
to see a mammoth creature like that is just having a good time. It's almost like you think, are these trained to do this? Because they put on an incredible show, and it would have been great. I'm not a very good photographer, and I think I was just using a 35 millimeter at the time digital camera, but got some shots that I'll never forget. And some of the images are burned in my brain. So I can't
Yeah.
even imagine what it's like for you. Have you ever been scared where you feared maybe that the outcome wasn't going to be great because of entering into the world of these creatures?
Um, Fortunately for me, no, not yet. I have been scared, um, not because of an animal, because of the ocean. I a few years ago, found myself in a pretty bad situation, where I was shooting a reef break, and long story short, to get into the water, you have to traverse down this cliff, and you're walking over barnacles and shells and everything, and in your bare feet, and it's before the sun's coming up, and it is a sharky area, and it's a very nasty, gnarly break, and the current's very strong, the waves are extremely large, and you have to time jumping off the rocks into the water. You have to time that with the swell, and I've got a bodyboard under one arm and a camera housing that's like 14 pounds in the other arm, and hesitation leads to devastation. And when the swell came up, I didn't go, and I hesitated, and right away I knew I was in trouble, and sure enough I was like, and your heart rate, you know, just goes through the roof immediately. And it wasn't, like I say, it wasn't that I'm in a sharky area or anything. It was like, I'm just going to get absolutely crushed by this next wave coming in on this cliff, face of this cliff, this jagged, sharp cliff. And you kind of go into a bit of a panic mode. And I was very fortunate that I had a good friend who's grew up on the ocean, and my, I guess my ocean shooting mentor, Warren Keelan. And Warren was right there. He grabbed me, he, you know, pulled me away, got me to calm down. And, you know, like my housing came open, so water was going in, and I'm got scrapes on me, and my, you know, you're in the sharky waters, and your heart's racing like mad, which is the last thing you need. And you have to position yourself, because, and you're constantly trying to paddle to keep yourself in position, because if you drift too far back, you get slammed into the cliff. If you go too far forward, you get sucked into the break where the reef is. And that's the one and only time taking photos that I've actually legitimately truly been scared and thought like, okay, I could be done for here, or get seriously injured, or put someone else into a really bad position. So didn't involve animals, but I mean, I do have a huge respect for the ocean and the water and everything, and that fortunately has been my only close call. When I've been around bears and sharks and different things like that, I haven't had any hair-raising moments or close calls. You know, I've had situations where, if you don't know what you're doing, for sure could have led to maybe a potentially bad situation. But being around the guides and scientists and researchers and experts that I've been around, I try to be like a sponge and absorb as much as I can. And I've learned so much over the years of how to conduct yourself and how to behave when you're around these predators. And there's, you know, I guess for lack of a better term, there's proper etiquette. There's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And if I didn't have that guidance, then perhaps, yes, I would have found myself in situations that I don't want to be in. But being able to learn from those people and learn how to read the animals and read the situation, I've been fortunate that I haven't found myself in any crazy situations like that.
Well, we're getting close to the end. I'm a bit of a foodie, and if you could see my belly, you'd understand that there's not many foods that I pass by. What is your favorite food to go to while you are on the road anywhere in the world?
Anywhere in the world. I guess it depends who's buying. Lobster is my favorite, by far. But yeah, I mean, like, traveling anywhere, nothing for me beats a great steak, and going to a nice steakhouse. That for me, you know, and yes, I photograph a lot of animals and everything, and I love animals, but yes, I still eat meat. Consumption has gone way down from what it used to be. But I do still enjoy a nice steak at a nice steakhouse on the road, for sure.
Do you have a favorite place that you go to that you would dine at? Like, if you could pick one restaurant to go to, where might that be?
Um, I don't know. As far as like chains go, I don't know. I don't really have. I mean, here in Canada, I mean, the keg is a staple. I'll always, I mean, but yeah, when I'm on the road, there isn't necessarily anywhere. Maybe Sullivan's comes to mind in the States. They've always had decent steaks and nice atmosphere. And one of my favorite restaurants is in Australia, a place called the Lagoon. That I go to every time I'm there, and it's phenomenal seafood and right on the ocean and a beautiful setting. So it's probably one of my favorite places to go to.
Well, when travel starts up again, and you get down to LA, we can get Paula to take you to Fleming's because they've got very good steaks. They're right across from Staples Center, and they also have an awesome seafood platter as an appetizer platter that has lobster claws and tails and all sorts of other good stuff. And if you get out east, let me know. I can tell you where the world's best pizza place is. That's just outside Boston Airport, and I've got friends up in Maine that can hook you up with a great lobster dinner. So
Sounds good to me.
lots of good things. And the one tip I will give you, if you haven't had it yet, up at the keg, it's my favorite. It's not on the menu, but you can order it. It's called the Mega Kega, and it is an oversized piece of prime rib that I think goes 24 ounces or so. And I had the
Oh,
pleasure of
geez.
having that 2 nights in a row when I was up in Canada a few years back. So that kind of might explain why I've got the beard for Santa Claus and the belly to go with it.
Noted. Though I think those days for me are behind me. I used to be that guy that would order, the 24-ounce steak, and everything that goes with it. And now I'm like, when I look at the menu, I'm like, is there like a 6 ounce on here anywhere? Like I say, my consumption of meat has gone down extremely over the years, but I still enjoy
You,
it.
you mentioned Australia. Is that your favorite place? Like for me, my go-to place where I think is heaven is Maui. And we've got the whales and there's snorkeling and not that I'm a big time snorkeler, but it to me that's like heaven. And if I have told my wife, I said if I die over there, just leave me there. You don't have to worry about bringing me back over. Just burn me, whatever it is, and leave me there. Where is your favorite place? Is it Australia or do you have a different place?
It's right up there. It's funny you mentioned Maui because that, for a number of years, was my go-to answer. I absolutely love Hawaii, especially Maui, and I think I've had these discussions in the past with Paula a couple of times actually. And it will always be a favorite spot. However, I think for me, like the greatest place I've been on this planet is Antarctica. The spectacle of Antarctica is like nothing else, and just the natural world that it is there's just nowhere else on Earth that compares. And so it's probably the coolest place on Earth that I've ever been, and one of my favorites. But yeah, Australia is also, for different reasons, it's right up at the top as well. I've been going there for quite a number of years now, every year except for this year. And Yeah, I could find myself living in a place like Maui or the area I go to in Australia very easily. Couldn't live in Antarctica, but great place to visit.
When travel starts up again and you're able to go someplace, where is the first place that you'd like to go?
Well, once our world opens back up again to freely travel like that safely, it will depend on the time of the year as to where I will go. It's going to be one of two places. It'll either be the Arctic or Australia. Um, as I say, it just depends on the time of the year. But I, having now gone almost a year without polar bears in my life is kind of crushing me right now. And same now without sharks and the ocean. I haven't seen the ocean since February, which is the longest in my adult life. And I so yeah, it will just depend on the time of the year and as to where I'm able to go. But those are both number one on my radar.
Well, I visited your website, Sandford Photography, and my call out's going to be to my buddy Mark Gillis and his son Gus, who's the big shark fan. Where can people see content? Is that the location to direct people to see the content that you're creating? Or where would you like people to go see so they can learn more about you and the great photography that you do, Dave?
So yeah, there is my website, which is davesandfordphotos.com, and it's Sandford. And that's in bad need of an update. As I mentioned before, we went on air here. That will be updated in the next month. And that's where people can purchase imagery, like my nature and wildlife stuff. As far as like if they want to view and get to know a little bit more about me in the pictures, social media is the way to go. I've got 2 Instagram accounts. There's my main one, which is Dave Sandford, just my full name, DAVESANDFORD. And that's all my nature and wildlife stuff. And that's my main account. I have a second account, which is Sandford Pics, PIX. And that's where you'll see my hockey related content and other sports and various different things. And then I've got my Twitter account, which is at Dave Sandford again, and then my Facebook page, Sandford Photography. So throughout those 4 different social media options, people can find virtually everything that I photograph on those pages.
Dave, it's been a pleasure. You're a true talent at what you do, and you've been a very gracious guest to spend so much time with us today talking about the NHL, what it was like, and your works. And I would encourage people to take a look at his talents because not everybody can catch the moment the way that you have. Again, thank you very much for joining us. We want to thank everyone for listening in to another episode of Ask the Zamboni Experts podcast. Have a question for one of our experts or an idea for a future episode, please email your questions or requests to info@zamboni.com. For more information and additional podcast episodes, please visit zamboni.com/podcast or search Ask the Zamboni Experts on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. This is Doug Peters wishing you a nice day.